There is a proverb that reminds us that it is very difficult to find a black cat in a dark room, especially if there is no black cat in the first place. This ancient bit of wisdom might well be the perfect metaphor for describing the scientific pursuit of knowledge. After all, the scientific pursuit of knowledge is, in fact, a blind endeavor that involves searching through the dark void of ignorance for barely perceptible phantoms. It is the hunt for the not yet discovered, and thus unidentifiable phenomena, a hunt that is heavily reliant upon our human senses and the current available technology that can help us parse out the artifacts of truth and filter out the darkness, all in the hope of finding a proverbial black cat in a dark room, fully aware that said cat might well not exist. Science has become an extraordinary tool for the expanse of knowledge, complete with a streamlined process that we have come to know as a scientific method. But it has nonetheless become all too easy to forget that science remains an imperfect endeavor, impeded by our human biases and owing much of its progress to the happenstance discoveries of often quirky and adventurous prospectors poking about in the void, mining for entirely different truths than what they eventually come to unearth. In most circumstances, these initial discoveries are only further capitalized upon by future pioneers who dig even further into the void, benefiting from that initial flicker of a light switch that first illuminated the room in the first place, to make the once unknown become observable. While many of us perceive science as an absolute foundation for truth and facts, the reality is that science is an occupation for theorists to expound upon the known and deeply question the long-established truths. After all, science truly advances when old theories are repudiated and refined, or even replaced with new theories which further broaden our understanding of what we thought we already knew. Scientific facts do not exist. They remain discoveries and theories to be continuously questioned, tested, and challenged. And though we should all respect scientists and their endeavors, we should never surrender our trust to them, nor fully adhere to the established truths, but instead place our trust in the scientific process and ready ourselves to accept new findings. The scientific method works precisely because it places its trust in the process and acknowledges the fundamental flaws and biases inherent in our human nature. Science exists within a continuing state of exploration and advancement, as we learn more about the world and work together through the modern limitations of science to find those wonderfully wild breakthroughs. It is an endeavor that requires an open mind and a tolerance for change. We must brave the contemporary frontier of conventional truths and stand ready to question and openly debate the long-settled facts and truths we have come to accept when presented with new data. History is replete with examples of imperfect science, times when the dominant theories of the day, the settled-upon explanations of the modern world, were formed based on the knowledge and tools that were then available. For example, in today's world, we treat the mentally ill with medication and behavioral therapies. Long gone are the days of frontal lobotomies and cutting a hole in a patient's skull to release the demons, and rightly so. But while such radical treatments of the past seem laughable to us now, no one knows what the future might hold. The next wave of progress and understanding might involve, a form of precise laser surgery that alters the brain synapses to relieve paranoia and anxiety, eradicate depression, and settle the mind, thus circling back to refine ridiculously archaic procedures into working and effective science. As a general rule, scientific research has a relatively small and infantile fan following, with the possible exceptions of individuals' personal areas of curiosity or concern. People just aren't that interested. There are very few examples of times when an aspect of scientific study has reached and aroused the attention of the American people at large, and none that I can think of that have been as pertinent and provocative as the study of the COVID-19 virus. The scientific saga of the coronavirus has, perhaps been the most detrimental blow to science in recent history. At a time when people deeply depended upon the credulity of science to guide their decisions, the scientific process of open debate, informed discourse, and the necessity of challenging the conventional narratives ended quite abruptly. Under the guise of quelling misinformation, the narratives surrounding COVID-19 were tightly controlled and distributed through so-called official channels. The problem here again is that there are no official, pre-established channels when it comes to science. Or at least there ought not be. These official channels, of course, bungled the spread of COVID-19 information and further undermined public trust in the scientific process. For example, early into the pandemic, Dr. Fauci warned people against wearing masks, stating that they were ineffective in preventing the spread of the virus. Now, Dr. Fauci later retracted this statement, acknowledging that he had effectively lied in an effort to prevent Americans from hoarding masks, thus risking a shortage among frontline healthcare workers. Once the supply chain issues surrounding the production and availability of masks were resolved, Dr. Fauci then urged Americans to start wearing masks. Look, despite the best of intentions, such a bald-faced lie by a leading scientist tasked with combating the pandemic did irreversible harm and helped to fuel an atmosphere of conspiracy theories, distrust in public health officials, and the increased politicization of the pandemic. Mask mandates became a divisive issue that, of course, led to mass protest and unrest. Politicians further irritated the matter by seeming to encourage people to let emotion override science if the outrage, fear, or lack of fear strengthened their party's public popularity. A generalized atmosphere developed where people on the left were expected to take the pandemic overly seriously, while their counterparts to the right downplayed the serious nature of the virus. It was rather hard to hold a stance anywhere in the middle without at least feeling like a traitor to your own party or being called a propagandist. Then along came Operation Warp Speed, a zealous initiative to quickly release a vaccine that would quell the spread of COVID-19. Now, vaccines against diseases have played an undeniably triumphant historical role in the field of medicine. But again, politics confused and complicated the rollout of this not-so-new science. Many Democrats appeared to switch sides, questioning the effectiveness of a vaccine rollout under the Trump administration. During the 2020 presidential debates, several leading contenders said they would have reservations about taking the vaccine. And most famously, Kamala Harris said during her public debate with Mike Pence that if Donald Trump told people to take the vaccine, she wouldn't take it. Look, while it's valid to criticize the Trump administration's reckless handling of the pandemic, such politicization of science, it only does more harm to a field that already struggles for legitimacy in so many regards. To quote Mike Pence, as he said to Kamala Harris during the debate, "Stop playing politics with people's lives." I hope that we can at least all agree that party politics should play no role when contemplating the question, should I take this new vaccine that was pushed through the development process seemingly very quickly? Is it safe? Citizens need to consider the COVID-19 vaccine carefully for themselves and ask questions based on science in their own individual bodies and situations. What is the best choice for me? What is the best choice for my community? These are very difficult questions to answer without trustworthy and reliable guidance, and the American people were placed in a position of having less choice and less information than has been granted to them in regards to previous vaccine rollouts. The Food and Drug Administration, for instance, promised full transparency about the science and development behind the COVID-19 vaccine, and then proceeded to fight vigorously in court for permission to wait 75 years before disclosing any information. Meanwhile, this vaccine has been the most aggressively mandated in history, and it's the first time that the companies producing the drug have been granted immunity for any potential ill effects that it may cause. And as scientists' exploration of the virus continues and the passage of time grants us experience and better insight, new information about the efficacy of the vaccine has surfaced, once again leaving citizens with incomplete information and many unanswered questions. Only time will tell if the many lapses in open discourse further fuel the devastating impact of COVID-19. My personal opinion is that to some degree, the public has been intentionally kept ignorant about aspects of the virus and have been manipulated in other aspects. But for the most part, the information needed to make knowledgeable decisions about COVID-19 simply doesn't exist yet. The sad truth is that the COVID-19 pandemic hit the world quickly and hard, in a widespread way that is unique to previous outbreaks of disease. It's also been the first pandemic to take a significant foothold in America since the dawn of the information age, so, of course, it was and remains a prominent and pervasive topic of conversation among the citizens of our country. With so many unknowns and so many barriers to reliable information, we've all been left struggling to find our own truths when it comes to the facts of coronavirus. But in these contemporary times, where the foundation of truth remains ever so fragile and contested, where alternate facts, propaganda, and misinformation run all too rampant, we must ask ourselves if we are really working together to understand the science. And right now the answer is no, not so much. It has become far more important to be right than to engage in open discourse. There are those who insist that there is indeed a black cat in that dark room, while others commit to the diametrical conclusion, all without bothering to shine a light into the dark void to engage in the actual pursuit of discovery. We assign credibility based on celebrity and authority rather than the merits of assertions, and the media has become the absolute arbitrators of truth, telling us whom to trust based on the status quo instead of following the actual science and analyzing the underlying meritoriousness of any claims or promises being made. And this has led to an entirely new phenomena, a pandemic of censorship. It seems that for a subject that has consumed so much of our time and impacted our lives so drastically, COVID-19 is the one subject that we really aren't allowed to discuss, let alone debate. By simply recording and publishing this monologue, for instance, I run the risk of my thoughts and opinions being censored. In the effort to curb the spread of misinformation, look, a noble goal, to be sure, any discussion about the pandemic has had to square with the mainstream narratives and official channels. Stray outside these constraints, well, you could face banishment from social media, the demonetization of content, run the risk of being labeled a conspiracy theorist. Such is the price we pay, we are told, to protect the credibility of science and safeguard public health. Again, these are lofty goals, even though the ends don't necessarily justify the means. We must remember that the construct of American freedom holds that free speech is a fundamental and protected right, and that the government is prohibited from silencing views with which politicians and establishment bureaucrats might otherwise wish to suppress. This is an important right to protect in America, especially when we compare ourselves to other countries where protesters and journalists are habitually arrested and even killed for speaking out against their governments. Yet, when the United States first established itself as a nation where every citizen was granted an uncensored voice, no one could have imagined the extent of the platforms that would one day arise for the all-too-effective projection of individual speech. These days, any Joe Blow in his basement can manipulate the news and be believed. The viral spread of misinformation is, to be sure, a valid concern. It's one that has the potential to inflict far-reaching danger. But what happens when the official gatekeepers of facts get it wrong? What happens when the absence of critical debate and free inquiry stalls the scientific process of discovery? How do we decide who deserves the right to speak and be heard? These are all questions that remain to be answered and may never be concluded in any kind of satisfactory way. Right now, our country has lawsuits filed against the CDC over their collusion with big tech companies to control the message about COVID-19. We have Facebook censoring comments about the virus being man-made, and then backpedaling on that same censorship. And then there's Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter that proposes to remove restraints on free speech. The battle over social media censorship is sure to be ongoing, with logical and reasonable arguments supporting all sides of the question. And we can only hope that science somehow finds a way to claw itself to the surface and prevail against the odds. On today's show, we will be continuing to risk censorship by discussing COVID-19 with empowerment coach and podcaster Steve Milverton, a citizen of the world who, like us all, should be allowed to voice his questions, opinions, and concern when it comes to a pandemic that affects us all. Stephen is going to share information about the COVID-19 response in his state of Victoria, Australia. And that is the final word up front. My name is Sean Sainhart, and this is Coup Save America. I hope that you enjoy this pre-recorded interview with Steve Milverton, and we will see you next Tuesday at 2 o'clock. Thank you for watching Coup Save America. And welcome back. Sean Sainhart here. Today we have a special guest from Melbourne. Okay. Let's try that again. Welcome back to Coup Save America. Today from Melbourne, Australia, we have an empowerment coach, Stephen Milverton, coming up right now.
Hey, Sean, how you doing?
Good. How is it down under?
It is beautiful down under. We've got an amazing day down here, and I live down beside the beach, so I think I'll be down for a swim a little bit later on. But yep, good to escape back down into the country part of the world as opposed to the city, which has been a bit chaotic for the last few years.
Yeah. So I kind of wanted to talk to you about that. The response to COVID in America has been chaotic as well. I'm curious as to what the comparison is in Australia.
I would use the word draconian down here in Australia, and particularly down here in Victoria, where I'm from. We had measures that were put into place that were not in alignment to the risk of the pandemic and COVID and what was taking place. Really poorly managed, and we have I think you have governors that sort of look after each of the different states in America and everything else. We have a concept called a premier, which is sort of very communistic almost in its viewpoint. But yeah, we have a premier, and so our guy we called him Dictator Dan, because Dan basically just dictated what we had to do and what we could or couldn't do. And yeah, it was I mean, people suicide rates went through the roof. Small businesses collapsed. Medium businesses collapsed, just purely because we're in lockdown. People couldn't go out. So some of the measures were draconian, and to be honest, they're only just releasing some of the measures now. So they're only still slowly reducing and releasing some of the measures that they've still put around the pandemic, which is 2.5 years old now. So yeah, it's a bit crazy.
Yeah, we've had so the lockdowns are continuing even still.
I know. So we're not in lockdowns, but you can get fined if you're not wearing masks on public transport. Like they're still mandating. So the removal of masks on public transport doesn't happen until another couple of weeks. They've only just removed, masks on planes where, so it's really funny. You can stand in the airport, crowded with everybody. And then you actually literally get on the plane, and you can't get on the plane without wearing a mask. And then you get off the airport and you're crowded by everybody. These were sort of the measures that were still in place. And so therefore you had, and nothing against the airlines, because these were federal mandated restrictions. So they're just doing their job, but people walking around being mask police, making sure the mask is all the way up over your nose and everything else. And it was just some craziness. So those things, but in down here in Victoria, our medical system is abhorrent at the moment. We've got about 20 odd thousand medical workers who are fully qualified, fully capable, who could be working, who got basically sacked because they chose not to get any vaccinations. In fact, here you have to have 3 to 2 plus the booster to be able to work in the medical industry. And so they're screaming for international people to come to Australia, whereas they could just, Dictator Dan could lift a mandate and say, okay, we now know we're 98% covered. There's no longer a mandatory requirement for the vaccines for medical workers, and our hospital system might recover. I'm talking like people who need cancer-based surgery, people who need sort of brain-based surgery are waiting up to still 1.5 years is the waiting list for them to be able to get these things done. And it's crazy. And he could make one decision, but his arrogance and his not wanting to be seen to go back because he's made these decisions is just now creating the rest of this chaos. Interestingly, before he took over Premier, he was the health minister. So he was the health minister, and then he came to be premier, and now we've got this horrible health system that's not working in Victoria, and he's trying to blame everybody else. So yeah, it's just that's been really challenging. But yeah, slowly we're coming out of it. But we have a lot of traumatized people down, particularly in Victoria. So New South Wales and Victoria are probably the two hardest. I'm not sure what it was like in the US, but they blocked the borders here in Australia. So we've basically got what, 6 states and a couple of territories. They actually stopped people being able to travel border to border, like as if they were doing border control, and you couldn't even go from Victoria to New South Wales or go from Victoria to South Australia into Western Australia. Now, we're the same country. I can understand that if this was, someone trying to go from Germany to Switzerland, or someone trying to go from the US down to Mexico, right? If you want to, protect your country, block it off. But that'd be like, saying that you can't go from California into Texas. Sorry, we're stopping the border. Now, I don't know whether it happened in the US or not, but it certainly happened here, and that was crazy.
Well, I would actually be okay if we stopped people from going from California to Texas at this point, but or vice versa. But yeah, it's interesting because in so many respects, this COVID situation was new, and the response to it was also new and very disorganized. We have mask mandates here in the United States still. We had the lockdowns that cost a lot of people their businesses, their jobs, their livelihoods. Let me ask you a question real quickly. Do you have pharmaceutical ads on your TV?
Oh, all the time. They are everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. Yes, you can't watch television. I sort of stopped watching television because the advertising was making me very frustrated. So the thing they're advertising for you to have is also the same thing that's causing you to go and get the other pharmaceutical thing you need to resolve it. They just promote this so you can actually go and get that. It's rife throughout all our commercials here. And effectively, the pharmaceuticals are rife in our political system. They're also one of the major funders of our leading politicians, also within Victoria and also in Australia. So, that's the challenge that I think most people don't understand. And this is where there's this level of, ignorance is bliss, but it's not really, because it's, doing a lot of damage. Personally on that front, I'm definitely aligned with a lot of holistic medicine, a lot of natural medicines. So I see through the corruption that the pharmaceutical has within the political industry, within the medical industry, within the education industry. And unfortunately, people aren't willing to admit or open up their eyes to see how they're being manipulated and the corruption that's actually happening.
Right. And, we have that same thing here in America. And I'm not going to say that the vaccines are not effective or whatnot, but what I am going to say, and I can get in trouble for saying this, but there's been a lot of controversy about the vaccine, and there's been a lot of underhandedness on behalf of the vaccine makers, I'll say, to be generous and liberal on that. One of the things is that they refused to release the vaccine data for, I think, 75 years, which is a little bit strange. And we also know that there's, again, I'll be careful in saying risks associated with this vaccine that were not disclosed and that we're only now just kind of discovering. So in the United States, we have this issue with abortion right now, where the Supreme Court has overturned abortion rights nationally. And it's interesting because a lot of people, my friends on the left, who are pro-choice, when it comes to the vaccines, suddenly your body, your choice is no longer the narrative. And I suspect that the idea of forcing people to have vaccines, to me, is draconian. And we have that here in the United States too, with healthcare workers, teachers, I think. How much of this do you think is being controlled, though, by Big Pharma?
But my personal view, 100%. 100%. And in fact, it's controlled. So I look at it even wider, right? So I look at, let's look at Big Pharma, but let's look at who's funding some of the health organizations who are determining what is a disease and what's not a disease, and what should be what should have a vaccination with or not. And again, like
Bill Gates.
Yeah, well, I was in Microsoft. LVC. Yeah. So you just look at that, and it's interesting that in the US, I get that Donald Trump in some cases has a good name, in some cases doesn't have a good name, right? And so we get to sort of, if you like, see the circus from afar. But then again, our politicians could join the same circus. The fact that he withdrew all the funding out of the World Health Organization from a US government point of view, and actually exposed that the next number one funder of the World Health Organization happens to be the Bill Gates Foundation, that happens to be also the foundation that's, that actually funds vaccinations and has a major profit interest in the company that was actually selling most of the vaccinations. And then you even look wider at the Bill Gates Foundation and the fact that, they're now doing all these great things in third world countries, which is actually, we need someone to go and experiment. So what we'll do is we'll pretend we're doing the right thing for you, but anything new we want to roll out from a pharma point of view, let's roll that in these third world countries and almost say, well, do you want your government funding from the US or from these other places to support you? And if so the corruption for me is rife. UN, World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, like pick any of them. Right? These aren't bodies that anyone actually we agreed to have. These were bodies that were set up by powerful people who set up a group of bodies to help maintain control over countries. And look, it depends on how many places we want to go down on this conversation, right? You can go back and look at world wars. Everywhere there's been a world war, the Rothschilds have not owned the bank in that country. So if you want to look at how the financial system works, the Rothschilds own the World Bank, pretty much own, they're all the reserve banks in all the different countries. And so prior to the Gulf War, the Iraq-Iran war, where apparently there was weapons of mass destruction,
we're still looking for them.
Huh?
We're still looking for them. We'll find
that's
them.
Right. They'll be there somewhere. They're probably still hidden in that statue.
I don't have them.
The Rothschilds never had any control of the bank in Iraq. Interestingly, now they have control of that bank in Iraq, right? So you look at this wider thing about, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Vatican, and the Windsors. There are the four power brokers across the globe. And then, so the Rockefellers are determining all the pharma stuff. The Rothschilds are determining where all the finances go around the world. The Commonwealth is run by the Windsors. And the Queen just passed away, and we were forced into a day of mourning. I'd prefer to mourn the destruction on colonization in our country as opposed to that. And so people just aren't seeing and aren't aware, and they believe that this local politician that they vote for in the local election is actually somehow going to be able to do something. And the reality is they're not going to be able to do anything unless it goes all the way up through this channel. And I think that's where it's really challenging, that we just don't have our eyes open, we choose not to have eyes open as to what could be taking place from that corruption point of view. And quickly we went from, COVID's gone. Oh, that's right. There's this stuff over in Russia and Ukraine. Like, where did the media send our attention? So again, if you want to look at who sits on the boards of the media, so have a think about who sits on the boards, and the people on the boards of the media are actually the people that are running pharmaceutical companies. So they will direct traffic as to where they want you to be seen, and people just get easily led because their lives, which as you said, the reason why I'm an empowerment coach is because people aren't empowered in their lives. They're directed and controlled in their lives, and it's not about being anti-establishment and anti-everything. It's just like, just have an awareness.
Right.
So If you want to go and get vaccinated, go and get vaccinated. I don't care. Like, just don't force me into it. You know, and I don't want to see it to come across as a bitter person. Like, I just have made a lot of choices in my life about how I live, the food I have, the lifestyle I want, and I just run with that. And now I want other people to sort of see it. And for me, knowledge is power, and you just have to have a willingness to have that openness to see what's going on around you.
And, why is that? It's incredible because when you have these conversations about vaccinations or about the way COVID was handled or about Ukraine and Russia, if you stray from the narrative, people get upset and they'll lob all sorts of words at you. Let's just call it that. They'll ultra right or Nazi or all of these insane things. Why are people so against having an open mind and learning for themselves rather than just accepting this mainstream narrative?
Great question. Ultimately, we've bred a society of people pleasers. I don't want to upset anybody else. But you just think of the language that's used in the media, so you're an anti-vaxxer, you're a conspiracy theorist, you are so the politicians, even Biden said it, and the politicians in Australia said it, and they said, if you don't get vaccinated, you are doing harm to your family and you are doing harm to other people around you. And so people don't like to live in fear. But what they don't understand is they live in fear every single day. They don't understand that their ego actually wants them to stay in that state of trauma and chaos and fear. So the media and all the all the PR people effectively know how the psyche works, and they know what sells, and what sells is fear. And once they know that people are afraid, they can control them. So you walk up to someone with a spider in your hand and you watch them run away. You've got full control over them. If you just it doesn't matter how big the spider, walk up and you can walk through a whole audience and they will scatter. And all you've done is put a spider in your hand and you've been able to control them. Why? Because they're afraid of the spider, not of you. And next thing, you've got something they're fearing, and then they're going to go, you're trying to hurt me. You're trying to get that spider to bite me. That spider's going to kill me. I don't want to die. And next thing, this whole narrative takes off in their head. So that's all that the farmers run off. Your other, all your fertilizing companies, so, and then we talked about pharma, but then you've got, other companies that are out there spraying crops left, right, and center and damaging soil. You've got your cosmetic companies, they're all doing the same thing. Cosmetic companies, they live off fear. You don't want to get old and wrinkly. You don't want to end up with grey hair. You don't want to go bald. You don't want to, you don't want to have wet underarms. So you need to have all this silicon-based deodorants and everything else. They actually go off fear, and so that's the narrative is we have to be this nice, in the box, sweet, understanding, loving, selfless people that do everything for everyone else. And as soon as someone steps outside of that, they've been brainwashed through all these other channels, the media, the social media, and everything else to say that's wrong. Us and them kicks in, and so and they use their fear base to say, well, you're a them, and I'm afraid of you because I was told I'm meant to be afraid of you. I don't know why I'm afraid of you, but I was told that was the case, and why would I not believe that the news anchor, because he's a trustworthy person. So yeah,
and I am a trustworthy person.
Yeah.
So
am I.
So there you go. As a sociologist, what you touched on something. They understand the psyche, and that is a fact. They have used psychological data, neuroscience. They have learned how to hack the mind to sell products and services, essentially. So they literally have done that, and it's strange because it seems so obvious, right? To certain people, once you're aware of it, you kind of see it everywhere.
Yeah,
but and I like how I didn't really consider the fear factor that you brought up, and I think that that's very interesting. And yeah, there is a lot of, I mean, yeah, like you said, fear of getting old, fear of getting wrinkly. How do we empower people to get beyond that, though?
Well, I think it's part about what you do. We just have to understand how our ego works. Yeah, and it's a really simple thing that we see ourselves. We don't differentiate who we are from our ego. We actually think that we are one and the same. So the persona I've got, the funny person, the martyr person, the sarcastic person, whatever, that's just who I am. And so the view is that who I am. What people don't realize is that was just a coping mechanism that you had to create to somehow survive in the family that you grew up with. So if you grew up with narcissistic parents, or parents who didn't give any emotion or didn't give any love, or all these sorts of things of in the world, I do a lot of work in the world of men's health as well, and it's like don't cry, be a man, toughen up type of stuff. And so we're all told that we can't have these emotions, and so we come up with all these different coping mechanisms. So I can cover them off. And then we actually attach ourselves to that persona that we've created. The next thing, off we go. I'm Stephen Milverton, this sort of person. I'm the sarcastic. I'm the comedian. I'm that. And therefore, because of that, people get so tied to it, they don't understand that they can become a witness to that, and they can actually do some work on it. So inherent within the ego is this desire to live in a state of fear. It actually wants to live in a state of chaos. It wants the drama, because it gives a chance for it constantly to re-justify all these coping mechanisms that we put into place. So helping people understand, and this is where psychology comes in. So psychology is great, but people sort of go, I don't want to go and see a psychologist, because they think, again, have a think about how psychology is branded or psychiatry is branded.
Right.
That they're all the crazy people, they're all the mad people, they're the people who are schizophrenics and everything else. But the reality is, it's actually such a small portion. But the global world, the politicians and the media and the farmers, they don't want people to realize that someone can actually stand back from the ego and go, hang on a minute, let me understand this. I can start to inquire a bit more. I can actually understand that my belief system was my parents' belief system. My conditioning was my schooling system. So once you start to understand that who's driving the narrative about what can or can't be taught in schools, and the way things are taught in schools, and what the way things are taught in pick a religion, any religion. I'm not anti-religion, but all religions will say, you need to be in the box. And interestingly, they all hate the other religion, which is quite funny, because they're all meant to be loving and open. But love our people in our religion, but don't love the people in the Muslim religion or in the the Hindu religion, because they're the bad people. It's
And,
anyway,
they're gonna burn in hell for all eternity.
Yeah.
Love.
Yeah, I was brought up as a Catholic, right? And that was the whole thing. You learned from a young age the fear of going to hell, of being burnt, and so it gets conditioned and drilled into you subconsciously over and over and over and over again, because of what we're doing in school and what we're doing at home. And you're only going to be successful if you actually go to university and get a degree, and all this sort of mentality. So people get locked into that, and so therefore they then see the world through that belief system and that conditioning system. And because that's all they're seeing the world through, they can't step out above it, because that creates change, and the ego fears change. In fact, it doesn't want you to become a different person. So yeah, that's sort of where the work I do when I'm working with individuals, and and in general we talk about psychology, right? So when I promote why people should come and do a program and work with me, I absolutely drill down into what are their pain points, what are they fearing, what are they afraid of, what are the things that they're finding really hard in life. So you understand it and you leverage it. But from my point of view, it's like, yeah, but I want to open up your mind. I want you to become free. I don't want you to be out there just being this radical person that's going crazy. But it's just, again, knowledge is power. And then you get to make a choice. If you don't know, you can't make a choice. If you do know, you can actively make a choice about, I accept that that's what's happening in the world, or I just don't blindly go along with it and then complain about the fact of, Why is the cost of living going up, but my wage is not going up? You know, why can't I get access to fresh vegetables anymore? You know, why is there's all this soil degradation, and why am I feeling sick, and why am I now relying on all this medication? You know why. We can help you understand that, and therefore you can make a choice about what preventative stuff you can do, as opposed to our world, which is all about, we're not going to help you prevent it, but we're certainly going to help you have to live off and have a reliance on a certain regime moving forward.
You know, it's funny because I was raised Catholic as well, and I went to, and actually that's why I'm an atheist today. I was in Catholic school, and I don't remember what grade it was, but you know, up until that point, I didn't really understand the religion. I mean, you know, you go through kindergarten and so forth, and when the teacher got to Adam and Eve and the whole taking the rib from, I raised my hand, right? And I'm like, wait a minute, God couldn't create another rib. And so I started asking questions, and all of the kids thought I was insane. And eventually the teacher just stopped answering questions. But I mean, I had a lot of them. I'm like, wait a minute, he couldn't make another rib? I mean, you know, I mean, is Amazon out of stock? What? I mean, you know, it made no sense.
Yeah.
But I learned from a very young age that asking questions is frowned upon. I mean, you do become an outcast in a certain sense.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That I'm not atheist. I just believe there's a creator, right? And so I know there's evolution, but something had to create something. This massive cosmos universe, right? It had to be created somewhere, and you know, and having a guiding person to sort of talk to, you know, from a universal connection consciousness point of view. But the one thing that really probably got me was, hang on a minute. We've now got one of the wealthiest organizations in the world who then have their representatives stand up in front of all the poorest people in the world and say, unless you give me $2 into this trade, you're a bad person. And so it's sort of like, hey, just go and sell all that gold you've got. Just go and sell all those buildings. And people would be amazed as to how many of the buildings in a city are actually owned by religious organizations.
Yeah.
Like, and so this is where I found, I'm going, hang on a minute, this is what you're preaching and your practices. You're actually now just threatening someone that they're a bad person because they didn't put $2. And we have people knocking on our door saying, right, we're here because we know where you live, we know you're Catholic, and you know you're part of the local church. Can you give us $25 a week? It's like, no, go away. What do you mean? It's like, you know, and then they get really angry with you. It's like, hey, I always love thy brother type of stuff. You know, like practice what we're preaching, sort of thing. So yeah, I know.
And you know, the other thing too that's funny is they changed the rules. First, it was like hell and purgatory, and then the Pope one day just decided, you know, that purgatory, yeah, that's not a thing anymore. Yeah. And again, I was just like, wait a minute, I didn't know you could do that.
I like that. There's a guy, Don Miguel Ruiz. He wrote the Four Agreements, and one of the things in that book, he actually talks about the fact of we are actually living in hell right now. Like us being on Earth, we are actually because of how our ego works and because of how our mentality works and how because we're always, you know, feel like we're in fight mode or flight mode and we're always judging people and we're all in this competition every day. This is actually hell. Like we are in hell. And we have the choice of getting to heaven purely by becoming more open-minded, by understanding what's happening around us, by taking back your own power, by learning more knowledge, by asking lots of questions, and actually being able to live that and just living in the present and living for now, not feeling all the guilt and shame about what took place in the past or having a lot of anxiety about the future. So it's interesting, you know, that take on it, and I really like it. It's like, yeah, this is a living hell. Like, yeah. You know, the last 2.5 years has been literally a living hell, you know, driven by a whole lot of devils who, you know, are driven by, and you know, we know that money corrupts. And so you got this world of corruption, you got the devils out there that they're playing in the world of corruption. And yeah, and it's been a really challenging space for them. It's like, how can we find a sense of, you know, if heaven is, I'm centered, I'm peaceful, I'm calm, I can find inner happiness and inner joy. How can I find that with all the flames that's burning in around me. And you can get to that point. It's just it's a little bit harder, and you have to be willing to lose friends, lose family, not literally, but lose friends, lose family. But there's a tribe that's out there for you. I think this is what I've found in the last 2.5 years is where they wanted to segregate the world and where they wanted to have an us and them, and you're out here to kill me because you're choosing your body first over the greater world and everything else. And an awakening is actually taking place. Like Coup Save America has probably started up out of the back of this, and we're having conversations about it. My people, the people that I now hang with and I connect with, there's a whole lot of people who are now running programs and running a whole lot of stuff saying, this is all wrong. You do understand that this is how the corruption works. But what do you mean? That's all conspiracy theory. And so no. It's actually in the board papers. It's in the stockholder reports. Like, this isn't conspiracy because it's factual stuff, because they're on the stock exchange. You can look at the annual report. It will tell you who owns it, who's getting all the money, where it goes to, and so people are going, so from what I think what they were trying to do, there is now pockets of groups that have gone the other way and going, hang on a minute, this is enough. And there's awakening, and people are starting to have the conversations about, soil degradation and how they're basically, all the fertilizers, what they're doing, and all barn bred animals and a whole lot of other stuff that's happening in the world now. They're trying to distract us with climate change, and yes, climate is changing, and I get that, but we have an opportunity to change the world on that front. But we've got to actually start at a lower level and work our way up, sort of thing. So you can't just all of a sudden say, I'm going to turn off all gas fired or coal fired electricity plants. Doesn't necessarily solve the issue when there's a whole lot of farming being created. Most of the crop farms are actually created to support meat industry. They actually don't go to the individuals to eat it. They actually create a whole lot of this fertilized crop farming so they can actually go and feed it the animals to be able to feed the 8 billion people that we've actually got on the planet. And so you have an industry that's creating an industry, but this fertilized industry is actually then corrupting the meat because it's all full of fertilizers that people are actually eating. And guess what? People are getting sick, and people are now relying on pharmaceuticals. Well, guess who's got a big investment in the industry in the first place? Just, it's circular. But people aren't willing to do that because they go, I know, I get my piece of steak from the local supermarket, or I'm not sure what you call it in the US. I know we call it a supermarket. So, local butcher or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, no. And, a lot of it does center around this model of capitalism. This idea of, during the pandemic, while businesses were shut down, people were unemployed, the wealthiest people got wealthier. How does that work, right?
Yeah, exactly right. Yes, yeah, that was interesting. The billionaires made more billions. Exactly right. Yeah. How does that actually come out of it? And how do we get to the point where social media platforms that are meant to be, that were set up as an enablement of free speech and a way to connect, actually all of a sudden became the fact tracking police?
Yeah.
It's like, hang on a minute, like, have you not seen how many non-facts actually exist on these social media platforms? Like, take out of the COVID pandemic stuff, right? Everything else on social media is actually false. It's actually a false because it's based on an individual's truth of what they think their view of the world is. So there is no truth in any of the social media platforms to start with. So why did you choose a certain level of mistruth? Because you didn't want a certain group of people. And again, the question is, why did that actually happen, and who profited out of it?
Yeah.
Yeah. To your
And
point.
the left, again, which I thought I belonged to, is now championing this censorship. And it's like, no, you don't. That's not how you. The way to combat bad speech is good speech, more speech, not less speech. And when we talk about empowering people, it gets even more difficult in this atmosphere of constant censorship.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And I mean, and that's the biggest challenge. You've got to be careful on even the words you put out.
Right.
like you put out something in a slightly wrong word, and next thing you're censored and you're black banned, or you're ghosted, and I mean it's just. But again, what a lot of where the censorship is taking place is that even though at the very top end they have these groups called fact checkers, a lot of the censorship is taking place down again at the family level and at the friends level, because people are now, stopped talking to each other or created this infighting at an individual level where a person's going, hey, I'm just letting you know that this is what's happening, or I'm choosing myself not to go and do this. And I had my sister-in-law has accused me now 3 times of attempting to kill my own mother. Literally 3 times, because I went to, early on, I did actually go to a Black Lives Matter rally that was here in Australia, and there was no evidence of any transmission of any COVID. It's funny enough, 15,000 people walking together side by side in the streets, and there was no tracing to come out of that said that increased the number of cases. But on a social media platform, in front of friends and colleagues, because I said, pretty much was, what took place is right, so you're out there to kill your mum, pretty much these sorts of things. And don't you dare go near your mum because you're going to make her. And it was just craziness stuff taking place. And this is like in family stuff. And I wasn't the only person, the only family where this was happening with. I was hearing all these constant stories about families just separating because that's what was being driven in it. And again, no one's actually asking questions going, but why'd that guy make all this profit? Like they're asking the wrong questions because of where people's minds are being directed to and how they needed to operate. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, it's incredible because it does go back to what you said earlier about fear. And censorship is fear. I mean, people are now self-censoring. I mean, because you have to be very careful about what you say, how you say it. And it's scary times, really, because this is exactly the atmosphere for fascism to really take rise. And especially when people are most afraid and they're looking for, a strongman sort of figure. And I want to talk about, speaking of that, what is the view of the Russia-Ukraine situation? Because again, it's interesting, as you said earlier, we went from COVID. All of a sudden, no, that's over. Russia-Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
What is the perception in Australia of this crisis?
So the perception is that Russians are horrible, bad people, and that Putin's the worst person on earth, and that he's just out there. It's the Cold War again. He's just picking another country, and he's doing all this abhorrent damage to the Ukrainians and everything else. So it's a big, I see it in LinkedIn platforms. I see it on other platforms. It's all on the news. You have conversations with people, and it's it's just anti Russia, anti Putin. Again, I have a slightly alternate view of that situation, which so that again just goes into if you look at what was bombed and where things were bombed in the Ukraine, it were very targeted attacks. The UN's not happy because apparently it's lost maybe up to 6 or 7 biolabs. And if I'm the UN, I'm not going to be happy about the fact that someone actually said, I'm not going to allow you to do what you've just done the last 2.5 years again. So maybe I'll take out these labs that give you the opportunity to do some of this again. Now that doesn't get put out anywhere. And again, it's just through alternate channels where you'll find different views. But Ukraine is also well known as another great cash haven. And so a lot of money actually goes in and out through Ukraine from a let's call it, from a very high-end money laundering perspective for governance as well as individuals. And so, so what are we going to do? So all of a sudden you have a person that goes, hey, I'm anti-corruption. Like, you may not like how we operate, but you guys in your World Economic Forums and everything else, you actually pretty much did a lot of damage to our country and you want to make us out for the bad person. I'm just going to stand my ground, and I'm not going to allow you to do certain things. But we can actually paint it in a completely different picture. So again, I still, it's about always taking as soon as the media tells me look over here, I need to go and look somewhere else. I need to go, why are you telling me to look there? And why are you painting a certain group or people or something as bad stuff? Because there's wars still going out through Africa, but the media aren't covering them. There's wars going out through a whole lot of other countries in the world where people are being ravished and, basically they've got no lives, and people are being killed, innocent people on a daily basis. And the media is not there. So why? Well, because there's no money. No one's running money through there. There's no corruption through that area, probably through their own local corrupt government, but the other governments aren't involved. There's no risk of damage. So, we have to create another viewpoint. Just back on one of the things is, I see what happened the last 2.5 years is one of the greatest psychological experiments that's happened. They knew it. They understood it. They executed it perfectly. And they now know that moving forward, because they've now dipped in and they've actually taught people how to be truly afraid and how to actually go against family and friends, and how they've actually got enemies down at an individual level. They've done it. They've dipped out. We'll go across into Ukraine and it's going to come back. If people don't think that we're not going to have another way of constantly, let's think about how money works. Cash is gone. Don't know what it's like in the US, but businesses here have gone, we don't take cash anymore. It's all on card. My mum's a cash person. Admittedly, she's now stuck at home, but she's effectively a cash person on everything. So they know that this aged population, they'll phase them out and they'll force them on the credit cards and debit cards. And as soon as that goes into that, everybody gets to see all the money. All the banks get to see all the money. All the reserve banks get to see all the money. And, this cashy deal on the side, and, people trying to avoid, taxes and everything else. That's all going to start to go as well. Cost of living is going to go up. Wages aren't going to go up, but now they know where every cent goes, and that's where the control starts to come in.
How do people fight back, assuming that we were able to get people aware? We're battling against so many different fronts. As you said, wages are not going up. Cost of living is. What strategies do you see for starting to kind of reverse this whole trend?
Yeah, and I think so. For me, I'm going to go back to what the world looked like pre 100 years ago. It was community based. Yes, it wasn't these big, large cities. It wasn't everyone having to come into the city to get a corporate job. The corporations didn't exist. The big money wasn't actually there. So what we need to do is to say, how do we come back into this community-based approach? How do we come back to community sharing, community farming? Like, how can small towns actually start to get back together and actually create a situation where they can grow all their own food? They can actually have their own solar plants. Now, there's ways that people can start to take things back, but that's why a lot of what's happening is about divisiveness. Because if I can divide people, it's easier for me to pluck people off one by one. I always revert to the animal kingdom. Think about how lions actually go about getting a feed. Normally what happens is that there's 5 or 6 female lionesses will actually go out and they'll go on the attack. 2 are ahead of the pack and actually just hide. And the other 3 or 4 will actually go and scare, whatever it is they're chasing, whatever, deer or whatever that they're trying to chase, wildebeest. And the reason for that is they cause chaos amongst the community. And then they conquer and divide the community. And what actually happens is that it's easy to pluck off one by one. So the one that gets separated, I can pluck them off, and then the lines of that. This is all that's happening. So they're coming in as a group of predators. They're dividing a community, and then they actually keep the community separated, and then they just pluck them off one by one. Us against them, us against them. And so that's all that's going to keep happening. So we just need to sit there and sit there and go, how do we actually protect the community? How do we actually come back and understand that what they're doing is trying to separate us out? How about we get more solidarity as a community? And it's not us against us. It's actually, if you want an us against them, it's us as a community against this group that doesn't want us to live in the community. I could go into, we've had massive bushfires here. We've had massive floods here. We've got cloud seeding here, which is actually causing a whole lot of excessive rain. Sure, call it La Nina or whatever you want to call it, right? But if you're going to keep seeding clouds and you're going to keep causing rain, there's going to be floods. And so the thing is, interestingly, these only hit the small country towns. Like the bushfires are going through, small communities that insurance companies don't pay the money on time. People don't ever recover. So what they do is they pack up, and where they move to a suburb in the city because it's too expensive or it's too hard to try to rebuild the town. And so again, this world of this concept of having all these smaller country-based communities are starting to shrink because you got more farmland. So if I can get rid of a town, I can have more farmland. I can actually grow more crops and more cattle, but I can also have that managed from a corporate point of view.
Right.
So that's my viewpoint, is we've got to actually stop that, get together as a community and go, no, we're in this together. We need to think about how do we have community farms? How do we get back into, my mum and dad, as an aside story, when my mum and dad bought their house, or they basically bought the block of land and wanted to build a house, they borrowed money from a co-op. Now, the way this co-op worked was a person basically just said, we've got $1 million that we're going to lend out. And it's an interest rate of, let's say it's 5%. And we're just going to lend that out. As soon as we get our $1 million plus the 5% back, we're happy. That's all we want to do. So what they did is they lend out to 30, 40, 50 people, the $1 million. And people went and basically borrowed and then just went and paid back the money. Now, for those people that when the money got paid back early, if interest rates went up and all these people paid back money earlier, my mum and dad got part of their home loan just written off because the people that created the co-op for the money actually got the money back. They got all their return that they were after. And as soon as they got the money back, anybody else who still owed money, they turned around and said, you don't have to pay us anymore. And so it's a brilliant concept because my mum and dad are like, oh my God, we've just been told that this last $10,000 or $20,000 we have to pay, we don't have to pay anymore. Because the co-ops now closed down, they recouped their money. They weren't greedy. They just lent money and then they got all their money back and now they're happy. And so our banks don't do that. Our corporations don't do that. But we could get back into that system where in societies we could have that thing about, I've got an X amount of money. I'm going to lend it out over 25 years at a certain interest rate. And as interest rates go up, I'm going to change my interest rate up and down. But as soon as I get back, if I lend out 10 million, as soon as I get back my $15 million, I made my money back. Whoever owes money, congratulations. Those that paid off early, bad luck. That's what you did. But we could do that. We could find ways of doing those sorts of things where the money is contained in the community. And it's actually, you got some true benefactors, not like some of these false benefactors and, false people are actually giving out all this money. What I do like recently, and I know the good timing is Yvon Chouinard, who owns Patagonia. I mean, what an amazing thing to actually set up a trust fund that all the profits from his business actually now go to saving the planet. Can't be sold off to anyone else. Can't be sold off to any. No, it's not on the stock exchange. The family can't sell it off to the next highest bidder because they've had lots of money. The profits now are actually in trust to the globe. And so that is such an amazing thing. So he's the guy that owns Patagonia, which is like a massive, started as a mountaineering company that made, people to be able to climb up rocks, do rock climbing and everything else, turned into a clothing company, but still does all the rock climbing gear and everything else. But one of his mantras was basically 1% of revenue or 10% of profits, whichever was greater, was always given back to organizations that were true about climate change. And he did that regularly. And now he's just basically donated his whole company as a trust to give money into people doing climate change. That's true benefactor. Like that is true giving back to the planet that we're on. And I think it's going to take some courage from some people, but hello, Mr. Facebook, hello, Mr. Amazon, hello, Mr. Musk, right? You guys could easily hand out money into communities where they could go and build houses, they could build farms, they could build self-sustainable, self-running communities, and you're still going to get your money back. And in fact, who needs $1 trillion anyway? Who needs $20 billion anyway? I mean, what are you going to do with it? money's false to start with. But what are you really going to do? And how do we solve that? So,
and this goes back to perception too. You're right. Money is a false concept. It was literally a creation of out of nothing, right?
Yes.
I mean, hey, there's a shiny rock. Let's,
So this is what, sorry, just on the money thing, this is what people don't understand. Of all the money in the world, only 10% is actually printed. You can touch, you can hold. So if everybody said tomorrow we are withdrawing every money that we've got in the bank account, we're going to take out every money. So everyone said we're going to sell every single house we've got. We're going to pay off every mortgage we've got, and we're actually going to take out every bit of money. The maximum you could get out is 10% of your money. The rest is all false. You live in a world of, and this is where they're moving people to the world of credit cards and debit cards.
Right.
The fact is, an organization pretends to put money into your bank account. There's no physical money, just put numbers into your bank account, of which you then use your credit card to spend against those numbers. And sometimes what you got, your credit on your credit card is much greater than what's in your bank account. And then you just transfer that money, those numbers across into this other bank account number of more numbers. There is no money. It is just this movement of numbers through computer systems with the perception that I'm either poor or wealthy.
Yeah.
I'm either living on the edge or I'm wealthy. And so again, it's a mindset that's been created about this whole thing about, poor and living on the poverty line, and all these conversations are taking place. Again, it's just it's a mindset that's been driven into people about what is wealth and what isn't wealth, and how you can be wealthy, and how some people are never going to be wealthy, and some people are born with a silver spoon in their mouth, or they got handed it to them. Again, it's a whole level of falseness about some sort of media campaign that runs with it. So,
yeah, it really is, and and people don't realize too that this whole idea of money is literally created from debt. And that surprises the hell out of people. It's not real money, like you said. It's just numbers that is created when people borrow money. What is your take on something like a general strike?
say it again,
like a general strike.
As in people choosing, not saying we're going to go on strike and we're not going to work to stand up. I'm not against it. Do I think it actually is effective and works? No. Do I think it's in its original purposes, like we had over here in Australia, like the things like the Eureka Stockade, where basically after the gold rushes, people were pretty much being screwed over. And so, they stood up and said, this isn't good enough. And then they pushed back against corporations. So where there was dramatic change that actually improved the benefits and the lifestyle, and people weren't being, being ripped off, then I fully support that. Where strikes are as a means to exert a level of perceived power by a union, in other words, and as a negotiating power, and unless you give me this unrealistic pay rise for my people, we're going to strike, and we're going to bring down the public transport system. We're going to do these sorts of things where it's a threat. I'm not keen on it, because for me, it's a bit more power mongering. It's two people just, I don't know whether I'm allowed to say this on this show, but I'm going to go there. It's two bull elephants swinging dicks, right? Yeah. Stand back. Because that's pretty much what's happening. It's the power broke on the union side versus the corporation, and we're going to go against each other. For me, no one's ever going to win out of that, because who gets hurt? The poor person who has to actually now work out how they're going to spend 2 hours getting to work.
Right.
It's like, so it doesn't do anything. And so that poor person who complains, the corporation is not going to care. The person who couldn't get the train into work that day and had to work from home, or didn't get paid that day because they couldn't go to work, that corporation that's choosing not to give the pay wage, they don't care about that individual. They're not going to change anything. So for me, at the worst, at the most extreme, a strike is what I would do. Rallies is different. So I see rallies as different, like getting groups of people to rally and actually walk through the streets, standing up for a cause. I fully support that as long as it's non-violent. But again, we saw here in Victoria, beautiful, peaceful protests. I was part of it, or rallies, I was all part of them. And then at the end, you saw always basically the groups that started some violence. Again, these were plants. These were seeds that were deliberately put in there. So the media got their photos to say, we told you this was not going to be peaceful, and so that's again where that level comes in. So rallies and protests, I'm okay for, but strikes, I'm not a big fan of.
What's the police like in Australia when it comes to strikes and so forth, or rallies and stuff?
So pre-COVID, good, supportive, stand back, block off the streets, allow people to go and do it. A lot of time it was already organized with the police in advance about where they were going to go, the route that they were going to take through the city, and the police would close off streets and allow these things to happen on the peaceful front. Through COVID, that completely changed to the point where you actually had police shooting rubber bullets into crowds. And, and this, and that's to the step it actually got. There's even like, this is being recorded live as these are the things are happening. You can see people having peaceful conversations with the police and agreeing that they're going to leave, that they've got to the end, they're about to leave. And as people are leaving, then the bullets get shot. Rubber bullets at individuals who chose to, stand up for, again, their personal rights of not having to. And these were people who lost their jobs because they chose their body over, the mandate to go and get vaccinated. And so here are these people going out there going, I'm willing to lose my job. And I'm willing to say that this is wrong. However, I'm going to tell you it's wrong, but I'm willing to not be a teacher. I'm willing not to be a healthcare worker. I'm willing not to work in government department. I'm going to stand up there and say, as tomorrow, I don't have a job, but I'm going to tell you that I disagree with it. And then they get shot by rubber bullets. And so we down here in Victoria, and I'll give an example. Like I had an argument with a police officer. I had gone out without a mask. And he was like, "Where's your mask?" And I said, "I got a medical exemption." And all I had to tell him was I had a medical exemption and my lawful reason, which was, previous trauma. That's all I had to tell him under the rules. And that he threatened to effectively arrest me. And then he's like, "Who's your doctor? I need to see your certificate. I need to see this." I'm like, "You're breaking the rule. You're breaking all the privacy rules here, and you're a police officer." And he was effectively threatening me and harassing me in an open street or standing on the street waiting for food at a cafe that you order through the window. And my wife was there as well. And there's two police actually literally going, "We believe that you're breaking a law." And I'm like, "You got to tell me the law I'm breaking, right? And if you can't tell me the law," and so there's this debate, and it ended up walking away. But from that, just very recently, I was in a service station. I was paying for some petrol, and two police walked in, and my body, I freaked. Like I've actually and I realized that I haven't actually moved on from that encounter and all the encounters that were taking place. Like people were fearing the police because of, we were worried about what was actually going to happen. Were they going to turn violent? Were they going to drag you away? And everything else, which is sad because I got some beautiful friends who are police officers. And when you talk to them, they're like, we got taught nothing. We weren't taught the new rules. We weren't taught the mandates. We weren't taught the directives that were given out. We just told that that's what you have to go and do with no background, no education. And so I felt sorry for them as well. But yeah, at the moment, I think there's still a lot of people have a lot of distrust for a group of people that you should be able to walk up to and say, I need help, and you should be able to trust them.
Yeah. Well, it seems like they're learning all the wrong lessons from America. As far as policing goes, because trust in police in America is not a thing.
No.
It's really, it is a shame to see. I mean, we think it's only in America, but, and it does go back to that corruption at a global level. I love the idea of going back to the local community as a hub of, and I'm going to say the word empowerment. Because that's really what a community is about: empowering each other, empowering the community. Community farming. I love the community, the co-op lending idea. That I think that's. But when people hear that, they're going to say, "But how do we possibly go back to that?" What would your response to that be?
Well, I think that it's hard work, but you've got to you always overcome hard work if you're there for the greater good. If you actually see this as being a greater outcome, there's a guy in Melbourne who used to be high up in running universities, and he's pretty much set up a couple of universities in the US as well. He's basically got this group called this Parallel Movement, which is a whole group of like-minded people who are putting in some time and effort to say, how can we create this parallel community environment? How can we get the great brains together? How can we actually start to create this? How do we find the funding? Who are the benefactors out there that can actually support funding, who also saw the corruption, who also saw those out there? So it's a form of political lobbying, but it's still lobbying. And it's just a matter of actually saying, yeah, it's going to be hard work to do this, but if we all knuckle down and we do it together, that's how we're going to get there. But that's how most countries were built. Having said that, there's a lot of, I've got to be careful on the fact that, countries are also built, at the cost and blood of the indigenous people that were in that country. So, and particularly here in Australia, we're still horrendously treating our indigenous people, which is horrible. So basically, but that's how it was built. Like the communities in tough times got together. And so tough times create tough people. And then tough people can actually do amazing things. And so what's got to come out of this is are they feeling enough pain that you can feel enough of the bigger why and the bigger picture for them to get together and rally and say, yes, we now actually want to do something about it. And as I said, I think off the back of this, I'm seeing things like this Parallel Movement group that I've got some connections with, and other groups which are a bit about, hey, we're going off in the world of, Bitcoins and golds and silver, and we're putting all our money elsewhere. We're taking it out of our banks. We've sold up our house, and, we're managing our money outside the current, global banking systems and these sorts of things. Is there a risk for that? Probably, because, at some point they'll get shut down. At some point, the bigger people with the bigger money will find a way to jump in there and, close those down or not have the investment. But again, it's about just constantly getting together as a group and just believing in the common good. And for me, the common good and having that belief will always overcome any level of corruption. And we just need to move forward.
Now, I want to ask you about being an empowerment coach. What does that entail? How does that work?
Yeah, it's a good call. It's almost similar to this whole conversation we've had, right? It's understanding that most of our life, we actually give off our power to other people. We allow others to make decisions on our behalf. And it's even things like when I get in an argument or a conversation or a disagreement with somebody, I'm actually somewhat giving a level of my power across to the other person, because I've allowed them to let me get angry. I've allowed them to trigger something in myself. And so we live in a world of externalization and if like outsourcing. So I outsource my happiness to, Facebook, Instagram, to watching sports on TV, to, watching Netflix. Like everything is this world of outsourcing, which means all I've done is I'm handing off my power to someone else to make me happy, to make me wealthy, to make me prosperous, to people sort of go out there and they'll talk to recruitment agents about how can I find my next job and where can I go to get this. So we've got to this world where, because I love technology and I love the internet because everything's readily accessible, but it's so easy for me to just give everything out to other people. And based on that, what happens is that I become a victim, because if one of those things doesn't work or one of those things doesn't come in my favor, I got something to blame. I can actually blame an external party. Whereas empowerment is about 100% ownership of accountability and responsibility for everything that's taken place in your life to now and in your life moving forward. And in my day, work with people on it's the one question that I get people to ask, and I ask this all the time, is what did I do or didn't I do that resulted in this situation? I have to answer that. I can't blame. I can't say what did you do or what didn't you do. It's like what did I or didn't I do that resulted in the situation, and that's always putting accountability and responsibility back on me. And so if I'm still angry about an event that took place back in my life, with my parents or with my siblings or with an ex-girlfriend or something else, the reality is I'm still allowing them to hold some power over me because I'm still attached to that emotion and I'm attached to that event. Empowerment is actually breaking that attachment and going, well, I'm here today and I'm alive today. And I've probably grown because of that experience, but I don't have to be attached and have the animosity. I don't have to have the jealousy or the vengeance anymore. I can actually now pick up and move forward. So that's what empowerment actually is. It's helping people understand that it doesn't matter what's taken place in your life so far. You are here today and you're alive today. And so you can now make a conscious choice about how do I want to live moving forward, and just helping them understand where in their life they're constantly handing off their power to other people, and how do they stop outsourcing and insourcing? How do I go from externalization to internalization? And then you get to the point where happiness just starts to come. You actually can be happy just sitting on the couch, just doing nothing, looking at a plant. I've got some beautiful plants in my house, and it's spring here. And so just watching now all the new growth coming up on them and, just watering them and feeding them, you just get this sense of connected and joy because they're cleaning my house because they're taking out all the carbon dioxide and all the toxins and they're turning into oxygen. So I'm in my house, they're giving me fresh air to breathe. So why would I not give something back to them? And that's where you get to this world of really nice empowerment because you have this symbiotic connection with everything around you. It's not an us and them situation.
How much of, I imagine this goes into the same element as fear, but when it comes to empowerment, how much of it is letting go of shame?
Oh, huge amount. So fear as an acronym is false evidence appearing real. So a very simple acronym. So again, we create these stories in our head that does that. But shame is the number one thing. So there's David R. Hawkins has created what he's called the map of consciousness. And this map of consciousness using kinesiology is mapped out pretty much from 20, which is shame actually, all the way up to 1,000, which is true enlightenment. So Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, at the very top. Shame sits at the very bottom of this scale. And it is the thing that drags us back all the time and it keeps us living in this world of having to look backwards and depression. And, we feel bad about all the things that have happened. So the thing is, being empowered is like, just go back and revisit that. Like, what am I feeling shame about? And a lot of the times it's actually feeling shame because you're told that you were meant to be shameful about that event. Because again, it's a conditioning. Like, let's go back to, the millions of Christians and the millions of, Hindus and everything else. There's somewhere in those religions that said, if you did this, you're a bad person. And therefore I feel shame for what I've actually done. And so you have to go through some mechanisms to be able to actually move it to help release from that shame. Now you can do, forgiveness. You can do actually some of your own healing. You can do some energy healing that will actually help break some ties. But certainly shame is the one thing that is the biggest anchor for all of us. Shame and guilt. Shame and guilt are the two things that are the largest anchors that will actually hold us down. And if we can release those, then the world to empowerment starts to take off pretty quickly.
Yeah, because shame does sort of proliferate across every dimension of our lives, and it like social media, there's that. It goes back to that fear. You should be ashamed to come out with a certain position, and that's another thing that I think is exploited by the corporate media and by corporations in general, is this sense of shame, this cultivation of shame. What can somebody do for their inner work to sort of let go of some of the shame that they have over, whatever?
Yeah, look, really good question. So what we tend to do is we have, let's call an event that you've attached shame as like a version of trauma, like something took place and someone said, shame on you for doing that. And all of a sudden I felt bad. What happens is that off the back of that event, we actually end up with an emotion or a feeling, right? And so, we feel bad. I felt angry. I felt sad. That feeling is attached into one of two core emotions, either longing. In other words, I just want to feel part of something and I want to feel part of a family or a community, or fear. I'm afraid that I'm not good enough and I'm afraid of everything else. So you've just got to, and what happens though is that because we attach that feeling and emotion to the event, anytime that event occurs again, we relive that emotion and we relive that feeling. So we just got to go back and just revisit that event in a different set of eyes and go, what was the event? What was it that was shameful about it? And what emotion did I attach to it? And how can I go back and realizing that emotions and feelings are fleeting. At any point in time, you can be happy and then you can be sad, then you can be angry, then you can be happy again. You just watch kids, right? They go through all these, feelings very quickly. And so it's about, what do I attach? And in understanding that, just revisit that and go, do I need to be attached to that anymore? And you can go through processes of writing yourself a letter, and often what it is that there's a lot to do with childhood trauma that sits in this space as well.
Right.
So what happens is, the simplest thing to think about childhood trauma is, we've got to an age 30, 40, 50 or whatever else in life. But the trauma that happened to that child that you hold inside your inner child, it gets stuck at the age that the trauma took place. So what happens is that you're now an adult, but you've got this thing that keeps coming up all the time for you because of the shame and then this embarrassment and everything comes up. It's really that 6-year-old that keeps popping back up in your life. And what we've got to do is we've got to reparent that 6-year-old, and we've got to sit there and give them love and care and say, hey, I'm now in my 40s. I'm now in my 50s. We're actually okay. We're actually doing all right. Like we've moved on. And so I want you to let go of that. You no longer have to feel shame about that event. You no longer have to feel embarrassed about what took place. It is now okay. We're okay, and you're okay, and you're loved. There was just something that happened at that point in time, but you are still loved, and you're a loving person. And you actually almost have this as if it's your own child that you would have that conversation with. But you got to talk to your own inner child about it. And you might have to do that many times, but yeah, you pick your big ones first and then you work your way through. But ultimately that's the key thing about it, is just understanding that there's all these snapshots in time in your life when you were kids that resulted in, having all these shames that you carry as an adult.
Yeah.
You just got to go back and revisit those and actually start to just give forgiveness to yourself and give that child the love that it needed, or actually let that child know it doesn't have to be afraid of that anymore, that we've actually moved on and we've been able to conquer that fear because it was actually false. It wasn't a real thing that happened, and we get to move forward.
Yeah. And, a lot of it too does come to, I love the mention of childhood trauma, because so much does happen in our childhood, and that's kind of where we have the construct of shame, right? How does that kind of work, the construct of shame, as a means of controlling people, controlling a society?
Well, the concept of shame comes in the fact of, again, the shame is about tapping into fear or longing. So if I can actually feel that you're not loved, then you want to go off and seek love. So I can control you, because then I can control when you do or don't feel loved, when you do or don't feel part of something, or when you don't or don't feel worthy. It's the same as fear. So shame, that sort of drives back into that. It's like, what was it that I made you afraid of? And it could be afraid of the fact that, I wasn't going to love you anymore, or that you weren't going to get food. So if you go back to children, they just want the most basic needs. They just want to be loved. They know they're going to be fed. They just want to be held, and know that they're always going to be supported. So as a parent, or as a community, or as a media, we have the ability to tap into that. So as an adult, if I'm still carrying that shame from a childhood, and I know that I've got these traumas of shame because of what took place with my parents, if the media comes in and I see them as a parent who's basically tapping into that trauma of, oh, you're never going to be enough, or you're a troublemaker, you're never going to make it in life, you're the rebel of the family, all these sorts of things that as a parent, we were made to feel bad for, the media is just tapping into that same thing. Because whenever something happens to us, we're just re-triggering those traumas that we've never gone from. So if I'm feeling shame about the fact that I might have stood up for my own beliefs, there is something else that I'm carrying from a shame point of view that I probably tried to stand up for when I was a child and I was told I was being silly, or don't be silly, that's crazy, or shame on you for doing that to your brother or to that sister. That was a really bad thing to do. So what we got to be able to do is understand that everything that we're reacting to as adults is actually just a reaction that we never resolved as a child, and it's just being brought back up again. And the media knows that. And this is where the PR people and the media know how all this works from a psychological point of view. And all they do is tap into it.
And that, I think, is a major roadblock for a lot of people because there's a shame of admitting that you were wrong about a position, right? Like COVID, for instance, someone who's maybe was bought into this whole narrative. And there's that shame factor in, well, now I have to stick to that narrative, even though I kind of know it's bullshit, because I don't want to, no one wants to acknowledge that they've been conned, or, so there's a lot of shame, I think, too, in people use shame, in other words, to kind of stick to a narrative that they know is false.
Yeah, so I would rebadge that as pride. Right, that's the pride coming out in the person. I can't seem to have been wrong. And so my pride, I'm too proud of a person to admit that maybe you were right and I was wrong. So I'm going to live in that world of pride, and I'm going to stick to that, strong and true, even though I know that there's enough evidence to prove out there, because again, pride is probably driven from an underlying shame, but there's certainly that whole thing about I always have to be right, because again, I don't want to be seen to have made a mistake. I don't want to be seen to have been wrong. But yeah, for me, at that level where it goes, I can see enough evidence that, we probably didn't need mandates, or we probably didn't need to go lockdown, or indicatively, we had 100,000 people at our football grand final, which is equivalent of a Super Bowl, or, the World Series in the US, and we had, there's still like 1,500, 2,000, like the amount of cases around is crazy, but we got locked down for 50 cases. Whereas you talk to someone and go, hang on, why aren't we locked down now? And they'll have all these different excuses, but then, and then we'll talk about vaccination, but you say, but that they don't work because people are still getting COVID and they're vaccinated. Right. So your evidence isn't stacking up for the reason why ultimately we should still be locked down for another 4 years based on the reason why we're locked down first. So their pride just won't let them move beyond that, because people just don't look. There's a fear of being seen to have made a mistake, because somewhere along the line, as kids, we were told, don't be silly. Why'd you go into that for? That was stupid. You did this stupid mistake. I know, I know a language I use a lot is that was really silly. And then I realized that that's probably something I was told going through my whole life. And so we just get caught in that, and then we get embarrassed about the fact of we don't want to be seen to be silly, because then we feel that we're miseducated and that we've been conned, and no one wants to be conned, because we again think about all the movies that we see and all the stuff that happens about the con artists, and I'm never going to be the person that gets rang up by the Prince of Algeria to say, give me $1 million, but someone else did. It's like, well, they must have been silly to fall for it. It's like, this happens all the time. We're told that being conned into something is a really bad thing. We should feel guilty and bad about it. So it's a constant this messaging that feeds something that's happened to us because of how that we know we've all been grown up, and then they just manipulate it off the back of that. So
you're saying that the email I got from the Prince of Algeria is probably a con artist?
No, I sent him $1 million, so you can do the same. He seemed to be pretty genuine to me.
Yeah. I'll go ahead and keep talking to him. He wants a check. I told him I'd send him ones.
Yeah. I sent money for his 14 wives as well, so I hope they're going to go okay.
Yeah, no, and that is, people. I get caught up in that too. I'm like, how in the hell do people? I got an email from one of them that said, "Hey, a cousin just died." left you a bunch of money, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure I would know if I had a cousin that just died that was rich, especially, right?
Yeah.
But people do. How does that? Speaking of empowerment, where does that fall in the scope of empowerment, where people do become susceptible to these types of events, these types of situations?
Well, I think it's on the basis that, you raised a really good point earlier that, I'll go all the way back to, when you first questioned, hang on about this rib thing. Like, can we talk through a bit more about this rib thing, right? That's where it is. People have lost the art of truly questioning. And I think there are some people, and there's nothing wrong with this, who just inherently trust everybody. They inherently believe that the world is just a beautiful place and everyone should be trusted. And so that person that says, yeah, give me the money and I'll go and invest it for you to make another $1 million and it's all going to be right. And they put their money into that fund. The next thing, the guy's living in the Bahamas and your money's gone. Like, they just trusted and believed that person was a genuine, honest person. And it's okay to do that. But sometimes, people get caught out on it. I still go. One of the things that a coach that taught me, that I worked with for a period of time, and is a really close friend, really gave a great visualization for us once, which is to go back and go, there's a point in time all of us were held by our mum in our hands at this smallest at birth, like at the most innocent place of all our life, as we've just been born, and somebody is holding us in their hands, like, in a lot of cases, the mum. And at that point in time, we weren't a corrupt person. We weren't a narcissistic person. We weren't an overly trusting person. We were just this innocent baby. And then between there and now, a whole lot of things have happened to us. So, inherently at that point in time, we trusted that the world was a good place and it was going to look after us and it was going to provide for us and support us. Because as a baby, we didn't know any different. We didn't learn to be distrusting or trusting. We didn't learn to, to be manipulative or to be influential. These are the things we've learned along the way.
Right.
And so, I always go back to that feeling. So when I see somebody who, either is the con artist or has been conned, I do sort of ask the question, it's a point where that person wasn't like that. But what happened in their life? What happened in their life that resulted in them being in this situation? And that's where the empowerment comes in. So let's understand what happened in your life. What was the conditioning? What was the belief system? Where did you grow up? How did you grow up? What religions, what society, what community, what schools did you go through? Like, you got to unpack all of that, because the combination of all of those things created who we are today. Right. And somewhere along those lines, some of those things that created who we are today is a result in you giving off your power as opposed to you maintaining your power. And we probably won't get into this one, but there's also, conversations about old soul, so previous lives, future lives, and also in relation to ancestral trauma. I think that's completely sort of different, aligned, but a bit more in-depth topics for people to sort of, to understand. But there are things that you also need to tap into and think about, because potentially who you are today has got to do with something that your grandmother or your great-great-grandmother never healed from 4 generations ago, that they've handed down through genetics and DNA that you've carried energetically for you, and that you have to try and heal. But if you heal, then you can heal for anyone else in that ancestral line that's actually probably have had that conditioning sitting inside you, which could be, if we think back 150 years, pride, shame, guilt, how hard the world was for people in that situation. There was no internet, there's no phones, there's no us having these conversations. Life was pretty tough. And so it's pretty easy for people to have carried a lot of trauma at that point in time, as to where we are today. It's probably just a new set of traumas that people are going through today with, FOMO, or, fear of missing out, and, everyone having to have that perfect 6-pack and the beach body, and, all these things that we see through all the different, media channels.
Now, so as an empowerment coach, do you work with individuals? Do you work with groups? How does that process kind of work?
A combination. So it's a combination of both. So I run a group program. So from a group program, we get on group Q&A calls. So basically people who are going through the program will just dial in on a weekly chat and just generally ask questions about where they're at, what's happening in their lives and what's going on. So, and often when one person asks the question, three people wanted to know the answer but never asked the question. So there's a good chance to have that conversation with a group of people, but then there's also one-on-one coaching. So people can choose to say, hey, as I'm going through the journey on this program with you, then I actually would like to also get on, a weekly one-on-one call, where we can actually talk about very specific items that might be happening in their life that they may not want to share it into a group situation. So it's a good combination of both. And then that's sort of, to a degree, that's creating a community, because as the more and more people are going through this and the more and more people, their minds are being opened about what's happening and what's going on in the world and how their ego got created and how their belief systems are kicking in and are impacting or affecting their decision-making process, then other people go, oh my God, I never thought of that either. And so they go away and they discover a bit more. And so you end up coming out with this really nice community that's a bit more open, less judgmental, more inquiry focused. In fact, one of my whole topics is judgment versus inquiry. Why do we judge people versus how do we get to an inquiry mindset, and some techniques for people to try learning how to become coming more from an inquiry perspective with an open heart, as opposed to judgmental from their belief systems and conditioning.
And these groups, are they local, or can anyone sign up for them?
Anyone can sign up. Yep, the program's fully online. So if anyone wants me, it's just stephenmilverton.com. They can jump on there and they can see the list of programs, what I offer. There's an opportunity to jump onto a free 45-minute call. So I'm even happy to jump on if someone just wants to jump on and say, hey, let's get onto a 45-minute call and just say, can you give me some thoughts? Can you give me some ideas? We'll have a chat for 40 odd minutes. And if you choose not to continue to jump in on my community in the program, I'm all good. It's because that's just one other person I've dropped a seed into. I liken what I do to, you've got this beautiful pond. It's just this really nice pond. And all I've done is I've flipped a small pebble into the middle of the pond. And that's one person. And there's this ripple effect. Because if I can actually touch that person, then they're going to go out and touch other people in their lives. They're going to have different conversations with their friends, different conversations with their family, and different conversations with their colleagues. Then they might drop a rock in there. And next thing you got another lot of ripples and another lot of ripples. And that's all it is. It's just, how do we start to get this ripple effect? And if we can start to slowly get people with more open minds, more awareness, understanding about what they can do and becoming more empowered, then we can get to this other place, as you said, about how do we get more communities operating. Right. So you got to start with the individual has to be empowered, then they can empower a community, and the community can empower a state, and the state can empower the country. Like you start to build up this ripple effect.
Yeah, that, and again, empowerment, I don't think a lot of people understand the concept, right? Or its importance. I mean, this show, for instance, aims to try to empower people with knowledge. It's not about getting people to agree with our perspective, but to think about it, consider it, and hopefully change themselves and find the courage to ask different questions. And I love the idea of this group there. It's sort of a very therapeutic type of in a community group, really, is what it is. How long have you been doing it?
So I've sort of been running these programs for the last 2 or 3 years. Sort of having different groups come through, combination of men's groups and mixed gender groups of coming through the program. So it's fun. I actually really enjoy it because I fully participate, so I don't facilitate. So I will also, there with things that will come up for me. So I'm actually as active. So it's not like I'm a counselor and there's a whole lot of group of people and I'm out there sort of asking questions, to a degree. I'll even sign on to do certain challenges. So if there's a new group that's come through, we'll often say, okay, what's this extra thing that you want to do in the next 6 weeks? What's the vice you want to give up, or what do you want to bring into your life? And often I'll say, okay, there's something that I've stopped doing, so I'm now going to commit. So I think in one of the ones I said, I'm going to commit back to doing a cold shower every morning for 6 weeks. So, committed to the group, And then you have accountability buddies. And the thing about that is that when you have the accountability, you can actually lean on other people. Now, and the learning is, if I didn't do it that morning, when I turned up the next time and I said I didn't do it, or the other person says I didn't do something, what they're expecting is to be shamed and feel guilty for it. What we do is to say, that's okay. Did you do it the next day? What did you learn from it? What was it that you felt stopped you from actually having the shower on that given day? What excuses did you make up? What stories did you come up with? Have you been able to move beyond that? And we just inquire with them. And so then they go, oh, like, I've told you some pretty deep, dark stuff that I've felt that I could tell nobody. And that, what, you haven't held it against me, and you haven't judged me. And you know, and so this is like a safe, trusting group. It's like, absolutely it is, you know. And so people then start to express more and more, and they open up, and then that's a healing, because they're able to talk into what's going on. They're able to talk to that deepest, darkest shame that they've carried. And then they realize, oh, like, I'm not the only one. It was like, yeah, no, we've all done some weird shit. We've all done some bad stuff somewhere in our life, right? You know, like, there's no angel sitting in this pedestal, like, you know. So yeah, and that's where I think, for me, for others to feel empowered, I have to go first. I have to be vulnerable. I have to lead. I have to be open. And I'm very open and honest. Like, I'll answer any question. You know, the only thing where my boundaries is if that's where it's got stuff to do with myself and my wife, where it's someone else. But if it's purely my stuff, just ask a question. I'll probably give you a very honest answer. And sometimes I'll warn people, be careful what you ask. Because, you know, my answer might actually make you feel embarrassed, because you go, oh my God, I didn't realize he was going to go there. But why wouldn't I? You know, like, again, that's the empowerment. The other thing which I just want to say is that shows like this, which I really love, it's actually about, I can make an informed decision. And this is the thing. You don't need to agree with me, but as long as now you know that there was two sides of the coin, you can choose which side of the coin you want. Whereas before, you didn't realize there was a second side of the coin. So now you know that there's two sides. You could either choose to research the side you weren't aware about, or you can go, yeah, no, I'm still sticking on side one. That's fine. It doesn't worry me. But now you've got the ability to make an informed decision, not a manipulated or a driven decision from someone else who's moved you down a certain pathway.
Yeah, and by the way, ask your doctor which vaccine might be right for you. This brought to you by by Merrick. This show is sponsored by Pfizer. Yeah, I'll probably get in trouble for that.
Probably.
You know, like, we're running out of time, but I've enjoyed this conversation, and I want to just really quickly, if you don't mind, can you talk a little bit about the power of vulnerability, being vulnerable?
Oh, wow. Yeah, look, the number one thing to be empowered is to be vulnerable, to learn to just talk into what's happening in your life and talk to the emotion. So vulnerability is such a powerful thing to do. We're told we're not allowed to be, but as soon as you're willing to tap into that. So when the whole thing is how you feeling today? Oh, I'm okay. It's like, how you feeling today? Well, in fact, I'm feeling a bit down because my mum's really sick at the moment, and I'm really worried about the fact that she may not have much longer to live. And that's really impacting me both emotionally and also mentally. That all of a sudden, I've just completely empowered myself. I've talked into exactly what's happening in my life. But what I've done by talking to my vulnerability, I've given permission to someone else to do the same. They can step into the same space. And so on a healing journey, on a healing path, vulnerability is actually having the courage to talk to that thing that you're trying to suppress and hold down really deep inside, and knowing it's mine. Now, if someone chooses to judge you, the thing about that is that that's theirs. All they've done is that all you've done is put a mirror in front of them. And if they walk away or they feel a bit bad or they start to judge you, just know that there is something inside them that they aren't feeling, that they really want to express, but they're actually now running away from, and they're feeling really challenged by that. So for me, you can't be empowered unless you're vulnerable, because you have to find every one of those deep, darkest caves in your body where you've stored those deep, darkest things and talk to them and bring them to the surface and acknowledge them and then let them go. And that's vulnerability. And it's going to keep coming up. Like, doesn't matter how empowered you actually feel. You'll walk into somebody, they'll say something and you'll go, bang, I'm triggered. I'm emotionally triggered and I'm fired up. And then again, you just need to talk into what it was that you go, oh, I didn't realize that. Oh, I've realized now that when I was 5, this event happened in my life and it really took me down a poor track and be able to talk to it. So you can't have one without the other. You have to be vulnerable first to become empowered.
And that I think, especially for me, vulnerability is its own major fear, right? So it would be, how did you, for instance, become comfortable enough to be vulnerable?
So I lent in, I actually went to a men's workshop with 49 other men and about 10 facilitators. And we had a whole weekend where we just did a lot of facilitated exercises. And out of that, I talked into a lot of deep, dark shame and found that I was not judged. And at the end, we actually had this beautiful brotherhood that came out of the back of it. And so that's the key thing about it is you have to feel safe. You have to feel that whoever you're being vulnerable with is actually going to hold that and hold it as sacred and not judge you for it and not go off and tell everyone else about that thing that you spoke about. So confidentiality and safety is really the key to having people having enough confidence to be vulnerable and to talk into where things are at. And so that's the key. Find someone. And a lot of times, funny enough, the simplest place to go and do it is people who you don't know. You know, go and find a woman's circle, a men's circle, a combined group circle where they're facilitating some sort of, self-development practices or whatever else. Because the thing that I've witnessed is that strangers will tell you something. So like a complete stranger will open up to you things that they're not going to tell their family and friends. Probably because they know you don't know your family and friends, right? So they're not going to run off and do that, right? They don't know who you are, and they just need to tell someone something. They need to tell someone about this thing. Everyone wants to tell what's going on inside them. Everyone wants to be able to get it out, but family and friends are so judgmental at times because we've been conditioned in that environment. So normally if you can go and find a group, and as I said, like for men, probably start with a men's group. For women, find a women's group, and then you can get to the point where you can do like a cross-gender. And you just learn that these are safe environments. And you got to do that. Now, for me as a facilitator of programs, I have to have a safe environment. So we actually have some rules, which is whatever is spoken in this group session does not get spoken out of this group session unless you've gone direct to that person and asked them permission to say, your story was so powerful for me. Do you mind if I tell my partner or something else? Now, I'm not going to say who you are. I'm not going to say anything about where I come from, but can I do I get your permission to tell that story to someone else? Because I think that's going to make a difference in their life. But you need to seek that permission, and that builds that safety and that trust and that confidence. And that's where it starts to come from. So in anything and everything I do, that's what we always start with. This is a confidential space. This is and universally, if you say, yep, I trust you and I can do that, but you run off and gossip about outside, the universe knows it. Karma's going to come and kick you in the ass, and it's going to come back and say, hang on, you broke the trust. And ultimately that person themselves are going to feel somewhere deep down that their trust has been broken, that they'll actually feel it back through connections. And so they'll start to close down again. So that's the key thing about it as well, about how do we build those environments. But I just want to say, like, you doing this podcast, you doing this show, this event you're doing, this is you in all your vulnerability. This is not a simple thing to do. I host a podcast myself, and I've been on podcasts. You have to be vulnerable to do this. You have to put yourself out there, because your guests are going to talk about things that, whether you agree with them or not, are a reflection of you in running this show. And so there's a level of you putting yourself out there, because people are going to go, oh my God, that person talked about this, Stephen spoke about this sort of stuff, and therefore you must support it or you must believe it. Therefore, I'm going to align you with him. And that's how we work. And so sometimes vulnerability is purely no different to me being on here. I have to be vulnerable to come on here, and it takes courage. But the number one thing to go from not being in power to being in power is having courage. And having that courage to talk to your vulnerability, having courage to be vulnerable and talking to everything that's going on around you, that's the key thing. And you need to have that courage. And so I commend you. I think this is awesome what you're doing. I think it's just superb. And yeah, I commend you for your courage and also for your vulnerability of being on this show. I think it's awesome.
Where can people find your podcast?
So my podcast is called the Unearthed Man. So they can just find that on Spotify, Apple or anything else. But if they want to look up the Unearthed Man, it's one-on-one interviews with men. So yes, I do cross-gender programs elsewhere, but that was part of my men's work, and I still keep that as part of my men's work. But it's men getting on, telling their vulnerable stories. It's men expressing all their emotion. It's talking about their guilt, their shame, their pride, what took place in their life, how they were brought up. I had a man that talked about the fact of how he was beaten up as a kid and how he attempted suicide a couple of times, had a gun to his head, like some really powerful stories in there. But they talk to every part of their vulnerability throughout that story. And then we talk about where they're at now and what they've done to move forward and what are they doing to provide service to others and help others go through their journey. So, yeah, and I love it. It's a really good – I'll put it on hold for the moment, but I'm probably going to fire it up again in 2023 because I just loved having those, 45-minute, hour conversations with all those beautiful men that have the courage to be vulnerable.
Wow. No, yeah, I look forward to listening to that when you yeah, that is powerful. Look, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. Now, do you want to take a few minutes to talk about your grief over the Queen?
Sorry, say that again.
Would you like to take a few moments to talk about your grief over the Queen's death? I know that must be.
I'm done.
Okay.
A complete different conversation about kings and queens and monarchies and colonization and everything else. But look, on a serious note, as a human being that's passed away, right? So I have absolute empathy and compassion for her family because she's someone's grandmother, she's someone's mother who passed away, and so it doesn't matter. That judgment comes, karma comes, and at some point, that's not for me to do that. And whether you think there's a creator or a God or whatever else is going to do that, that's going to all come along the way. But she was still someone's mum, someone's daughter, someone's grandma, loved by many people, and so that's a sad event for those people, and they get all my empathy and compassion. Do I think she could have done some things differently while she was in the role of Queen? Sure. Definitely, indeed. But I'm not going to detract from the fact that there's sadness. In Aboriginal culture, they call it sorry business. So when someone passes away, so, her family are going through sorry business and I support them on that. And, and so I would think that then people would have the same for my grandmother, my mother, other people that pass away. And so, on a serious note, that's where love and compassion comes in. And that's the difference. I can disagree with some of the philosophies and the principles, but ultimately it's a human being that's lost a life. And so therefore we can still have that compassion. We don't have to be, I see people are very angry and everything about it, but there's a level that we still got to drop down into, that coming from a place of love.
Well, again, thank you so much for joining us. StephenMilverton.com and the podcast, The Unearthed Man. And this has been Coup Save America. I want to thank you all for watching or listening, and we will see you back here next Tuesday. Thank you so much. Thanks again, Stephen.
Thanks, Sean. It's been excellent. Cheers.
Yes, been great. Thank